Welcome to an unusual version of what I call Flight 4. It's a video that I'll put out sort of temporarily. I will update it as soon as Microsoft allows me to. I'll explain that in a minute. This actual video I filmed originally in February of 2020. Some minor editing, really just this intro that I'm recording now is done on December 12th of 2020. Primary mission for this particular flight is to use a glider, a particularly high-performance glider at that, to demonstrate some basics about how airplanes glide during engine failure situations. Gliding is a lot of fun, and there are some principles that we as controllers can use to understand how to deal with engine failure situations. Secondarily, I'm going to demonstrate a particularly unusual and in fact a quite wild technique for getting out of some VFR and IMC situations. To be clear, the exact technique that I'm going to demonstrate will never, ever, ever be used by a controller as far as I can tell. However, it's going to translate to some interesting principles later for situations we can use. Filming this at Indianapolis International Airport. Again, I filmed this back in February of 2020, so several months ago. So standard caveats, this is not real flight instruction. You'll figure that one out pretty quick in a few minutes here. But anyway, as far as the flight sim settings, we are not using anything like this, and here's why. The new version of Microsoft Flight Simulator does not have any gliders yet. My understanding is they should be coming out here within the next couple months to maybe a few months, where we'll see what Microsoft gives us and so on. In the meantime, so what I'm using instead, this is an older version. It was known as Microsoft Flight Simulator X. For the version, I'm just loosely saying it's 10 years old. The graphics are poor, the computer's old, and the flight model is the FSX version. And in addition, I filmed this with a cheap webcam and using only the integrated microphone. If you'll indulge me for just 20 seconds or so, Indianapolis Center, we've had a flight simulator in the building for about the last 10 years. It's this old computer with this FSX flight sim. Every once in a while, myself or one of a couple of other pilots would run some developmentals through there to show them some certain things about stuff. That's always just been kind of additional training. And when I was first coming up with the idea for this particular course, I did some kind of draft video. So I filmed this one just with a cheap webcam, kind of sitting on a tripod over my shoulder using just the integrated microphone. So the graphics are not great. I will update this as soon as I can. In the meantime, this really serves a useful purpose, and so I'm going to leave it temporarily. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the flight. All right, welcome to what I call Flight 4. It's the last of the 4 introductory flights in this series. This time we are in a glider. This is a nice high-performance glider. It's this particular one's made by a German company. But what we're going to do is we're doing for all these flights, we're learning foundational lessons that apply to a wide variety of emergencies. So when you think that we're getting in a glider and we're going to learn some stuff about engine failure, you're right. You'll find out later that we're actually going to learn about stuff beyond just engine failure in some surprising ways. But at the moment, we're going to hop in the glider and we're going to go flying here in just a second. I will note, just as we get started, my first solo flight was on my 14th birthday in a glider, and I want to ask you a question. When I did my first solo on my 14th birthday, do you think I was celebrating with a self-induced engine failure emergency? No. Gliders are actually quite safe. There's a little bit of stuff you have to know to learn what you're doing, but you can solo a glider as young as 14 years old. You can't even operate a car or certainly fly an airplane with all of its systems and things. So we'll learn a couple things about gliders. Again, this is not a learn to fly course and so on. But let's get started. We're actually going to do 2 very short flights in the glider. We're going to make off airport landings for both. You'll see why. But with the 2 short flights, in the sim here, there's 2 ways to take off. I'm going to hit Control Shift and then Y. That summons the tow plane, and we're going to take off behind the tow plane. Use that to climb up to altitude at least partway. So the slack's coming out of the tow rope. We're about to get rolling. You hear that tone. You'll hear some beeps. I'll explain that in a minute. For the moment, I know it's annoying. Just live with me for about a minute here. The glider will lift off at a slower speed than the tow plane. In the real world, you don't want to start climbing, okay, while the tow plane's still accelerating, because you've got leverage on his tail and can move his tail around. But the tow plane lifts off, and normally you start off with what's known as the high tow position. The short version on that sound, that's basically like an audio version of the vertical speed indicator. It's used by glider pilots when they're soaring. In the sim here, for our purposes, certainly today, it's more just annoying. So the vario button, I'm going to click that vario button, it turns it off. Only reason I did that is if you hop in the sim flight, the glider, you're going to have that noise. It's going to drive you nuts. You're going to be wondering, what's going on? Just hit the vario button, turns it off. It has a useful purpose, but not for us. This is the normal high toe position. Now that toe plane, like any airplane making lift, is making wingtip vortices, the wake turbulence, so they're spinning off the wing and they're coming back towards us. Actually, they're stationary, we're moving through the air, but they do sink. So at the moment, if you could picture those, the turbulence verbal was not that, they're actually underneath us. In gliders, it's normal operating procedure, especially in training. You practice going down through that little bit of wake turbulence to what's known as the low toe position. And you can do the low toe position, you can go back up through it, and you can go to what's known as the high toe position. And if I do an accelerated version of another maneuver that's taught to glider pilots on toe, you usually go completely around the wake in a box shape, so it's known as boxing the wake. The quick version of it I'll show you here. We'll sort of peel off to the right a little bit, matches heading, but peel off to the right, go down, staying to the right to that approximate low toe position. I'm going to do a little quicker than I would in the real glider. I'll slide across. We're underneath his wake vortices. Go out to here. Kind of get out to the left side. Come back up. Again, I'm doing this quicker than I would in the real glider. So if you want to have some fun while you're using the glider in the sim, you can practice boxing the wake, but be careful if you get out of shape too far. And I'm going to purposely do this maneuver where I get a little too far out of shape. You are going to break the rope. It says the tow rope is broken, and you're a glider. Normally, the real-world way you release from the tow plane is I turn to the right and he turns to the left. That's standard operating procedure. Is you would pull the release knob. That yellow knob, you can click on it. It's not going to do anything because the tow rope is not connected. But that's the tow release if you want to release. The other thing we can do, and let's just do this so we buy a little bit of time here, as it's doing a little bit of a pitch fuguoid, and I'll start to turn back to the right. I showed you this in flight 2. If you hit Y, you enter slew mode. F4, we're going to climb. For our purposes, at the moment, we're going to climb up to a whopping 25,000 feet. While we're doing that, what would you really be thinking about a glider at 25,000 feet? You'd be worried about hypoxia. if you weren't worried about, say, regulations and on an IFR clearance and so on. So for our purposes, though, we're going to have some fun, get up to about 25,000 feet. When I first jump off slew mode, it does this little bit of a pitch fuguoid and so on. But let me just get it fairly stable here. Gliders tend to have less longitudinal stability than most airplanes for a couple of reasons. So it might wander around a bit more and take longer and sort of oscillate out from the pitch fuguoids. But let me switch views for a second and just put you in this view. You can see things a little better. Airspeed right now, dipped to about 60. We're kind of coming up on 65 or so. It's going to do its little pitch fuguoids. We're about 25,000 feet. The black lever is for the flaps, and I don't know if you can quite read it on the video. Right now we're at 0 degrees flaps, which is what you expect for takeoff, and it's got settings like 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 13, and then an L for landing that you'd expect. It also has settings of -5 and -9 flaps, which I don't think you can read in the video, but why would a glider have negative flaps? There is a technical reason, and I could answer that. But one of the things I'd like to point out is you can at least get your head around the idea that gliders and glider designers, they kind of have some tricks about how to maximize the glide, and there is something with bringing the flaps actually negative, which you can't do in most airplanes. So gliders know a few things about how to maximize glide. We're going to not really cover those quite yet. Okay, the blue handle is for what's sometimes called the spoilers, the speed brakes, the air brakes. They go by different names and so on. In this setup, it's mapped with the default keyboard thing. It's the little backslash mark, same as with the question mark if you hit shift. But if I hit that, the blue handle will come back and you'll see the spoiler panels pop up on the wings. We're only looking at the left, there's a matching one on the right. And the nose pitches down as it's trying to maintain the speed. But I can put that back in and so on. So you've got spoilers or speed brakes, and that adds some drag. It slows or at least reduces the lift. Sorry, it slows and reduces the lift on the glider, and so you won't glide as well. Little green thing, you almost can't see it. That's the pitch trim. You can see it move maybe a little bit as I'm hitting that thumb switch, and you can notice that the nose is moving as we hit some turbulence again. This does have retractable landing gear, so at the moment the gear's down, flip the gear up. If I switch to the outside view and come down, you can see that the gear's up. If I hit G for the gear, you'll see that the gear comes back down. So even gliders can have retractable landing gear, depends on the model. But retractable gear in a glider is going to reduce the drag. Put the gear down in a glider or an airplane with an engine failure, and you're adding drag. And then back to the cockpit for a second. You already saw the tow release. There's a little radio here that's battery powered. Here's the battery on-off switch. A couple things for opening the canopy or the emergency canopy jettison if you want to parachute out for some emergency reason. And I don't think you can quite see it in the video, but there's a little sticker here with a little icon. It looks like a water spigot with like water coming out. Now what's that about? Well, there's two handles here. I'm going to click the handles and then switch to the outside view. So I'm going to click those, switch to the outside view. And can you see that little white trail that's coming out right now? That's the way that Microsoft Flight Sim models that we're dumping the water ballast. Now what's that all about? Why would you have water ballast? When you first kind of think, all right, some water ballast, maybe that has to do with like balancing the glider, you know, for optimum gliding. This glider is probably like 40% of its max takeoff weight is with filling it with about 500 pounds worth of water. It has nothing to do with getting it trimmed. You're adding weight, and for most high-performance gliders, they have a water ballast system, and they routinely will take off with a lot of water, a whole lot of extra weight. Now they'll dump it, so there's the little switches, and you dump the water before landing to reduce some of the weight on the structure and so on. But again, I can give you the technical explanation. I won't do that right now, but I want you to understand that there is a technical explanation that can be given. And part of the takeaway is that gliders, in some ways, actually weight improves the gliding characteristic. And the mental lesson I want you to sort of file away on that, I'm just going to start a right turn, kind of stay back towards the airport, is that just because that a plane is heavy or a glider's heavy or an airplane's heavy, in an engine failure gliding situation, weight actually can help the glide in some ways. It has pros and cons, but if you ever have, as a controller, an airplane with an engine failure, don't think to yourself, oh, that, you know, big heavy airplane, so it's going to glide really poorly or something. No, I mean, weight's fine. I'm going to dump it for landing gear, and that has a couple advantages for landing. But let's go back into the cockpit, and I'm going to switch back to the virtual cockpit, and it's time to land. Remember, I promised you a short flight. Well, we could be up here all day from 23,000 feet, right? Let's land. And I'm going to call my landing point by showing it to you. I'm going to pop the speed brakes, and if you don't mind, I'm going to go nose down pitch trim. Let's see about where we're at, because I've just been flying around. That's downtown Indy. I think as I put the nose down, we're going to point kind of at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There's the Motor Speedway. Here's 465 for all of you Indianapolis people, so the airport's going to be over here. We'll turn back this way. Use pitch trim. Okay. Remember I said we're going to land off airport, and yet here I am turning towards the airport. Notice we're basically vertical, but with the speed brakes out, the airspeed, I know you probably can't read on the video, I'm only doing about 95 knots, and we're almost a vertical descent. Okay, altimeter's plummeting right now, right? Okay. Think about how effective those speed brakes are. We're going to learn some lessons about that, but I'm going to call my landing point. It's a little fuzzy with this mega scenery earth until we get just a little bit lower, but if you can make it out, that right there is where we are, Indy Center. That's the entrance road. Here's perimeter road. I'm going to call my landing spot. We're going to end up coming in from the east. We're going to come in over perimeter road. Now there are trees there in real life. Here the trees are two-dimensional, so we're just going to kind of ignore the trees. And thankfully here we're going to use them as two-dimensional objects. So ignoring the trees, we're going to come over perimeter road. We are going to touch down on the entrance road after perimeter road, and we are going to stop before the guard shack. That way when you leave work today and you drive out the entrance road, which is also the exit road, you'll have like an intuitive sense of what kind of landing roll is possible. At least in a glider, it's going to be a little different in an airplane. But we are going to touch down right there, and we are going to stop before the guard shack. And yes, we are vertical right now. Now I'm not going to continue vertical and pull up at the last split second, okay? But that's what we're going to do, and that's going to be used to make a couple of points about off-airport landings, how to land with an engine failure. Obviously, I'm pulling some tricks out of my years of experience here and so on. But let's start the approach maybe by flying past the guard shack and waving at him. So if you want, this is the time to insert your favorite Top Gun quote, but apply the guard shack to the tower. So we want to do a guard shack flyby, make a negative Ghost Rider. The pattern is full, and I'm about to do it anyway. Spill the guard's coffee. So in a few seconds, I'll pull out. Don't worry. But speed brakes off. We're going to pick up some speed. There's the guard shack. We'll sort of buzz the building. Come around. Kind of turn back towards the east here a little bit. You can see out the left wing. Okay, I do have the gear down. We're slow enough I can put the flaps down. Pitch trim. Overshot the turn just a little bit, so I'm going to come back, try to get lined up. Remember I said we are not going to touch down on perimeter road. We're going to touch down after perimeter road, on the entrance road, and we're going to stop before the guard shack. I'm going to aim basically for perimeter road because I'm going to round out and land beyond it by a couple of feet. There's the landing. And if you want to see how we did, I'm going to switch the view, hit A couple times, and you'll see where we came to a stop. So when you leave work today, picture touching down right there and landing before the first set of trees. And I called it while vertical from 20,000 feet. If you know what you're doing, and I'll explain some of the tips and things later, you can really be that precise. It's a little easier in a glider for a very unexpected reason, and there are things you can do to shorten your landing roll. I said we're going to do 2 flights, so here's what we're going to do to expand your educational horizon. And I'm going to let you in on one of the tricks that was not a cheat. I did not, you have my word, I did not cheat this landing, and I'll prove it to you in a minute. But I was aware of it. One thing I didn't tell you about before we took off is for the first time in these 4 introductory flights, I've played with the weather a little bit. I turned on a little bit of a headwind. I'm going to hit Alt, World, Weather, and you can see the little current condition, wind 260 at 20, so we landed into a 20 knot headwind. I don't think you can see that on the video as I'm looking at my laptop here. But we landed with the wind 260 at 20. By landing into the wind, you improve the precision of the touchdown point. The pilot knows what they're doing, but you also greatly reduce the ground roll. You greatly reduce the amount of kinetic energy that has to be dissipated at touchdown. For an off-airport landing, you almost always, unless there is some overriding feature, just with local terrain and things, you really want to land into the wind if there's any significant wind at all. At 20 knot wind, which, yeah, that's a little bit of a breezy day, is enough wind. You want the plane to land into the wind, and that makes a huge difference in survivability. So that was not a cheat, it was just intelligence on my part to land into the wind. Okay, but I've got user-defined weather. I'm going to click Customize, I'm going to click Advanced Weather. I'm going to take the wind and turn it down to 0. So I now have no wind. I will repeat that landing with no wind. You'll see what a difference that makes. And so you'll see that part of that was because of the wind, but not entirely. But we're also going to do something else. We're going to add a cloud layer. I'm going to set the clouds so that They're basically from 10,000 to 4,000 feet MSL. So that's about 3,000 feet AGL. And for our purposes, I'm going to make it overcast. So we've got 3,000 feet AGL overcast. And from 10,000 to 4,000, I'm going to set the visibility to 0. The Microsoft way it does clouds in this older sim is fine. It's not super realistic. You'll see when we get in the clouds that we'll have 0 outside visibility. Above the clouds, ironically, you can actually see through them and so on. But I said we're going to do 2 flights and show you 2 takeoff methods, so I'll show you the other takeoff method here real quick. So let's switch back to the cockpit. And the other takeoff method is just to go immediately to the slew mode. So let me get the flaps forward if it's going to let me do it. Okay. The speed brakes, I want to double check that the speed brakes are off and we're set. So I'm just going to hit Y, F4. So we're just going to climb. We'll go up through the clouds with no visibility. 10,000 feet, we'll pop out, we'll get up a little bit, come out of slew mode, and we're going to like instantly accelerate. Let me just make sure those flaps are, oops, sorry, that's pitch trim, that's confused myself. Okay, so I've got the flaps set for 0, pitch trim for where I want here. That was embarrassing, I was hitting the pitch trim for the flaps. Forgot which thumb switch, that would never happen in a real airplane. Now, I'm going to replicate that same landing, same spot. We'll have a slightly longer ground roll because there's no wind this time. But I want you to think about why those speed brakes are that effective on a glider like this. It's for 2 reasons. One, so that we can really control with variability of the glide ratio how well we're gliding, and that adds a lot to the precision of the landing. But the other thing is, think about the emergency that I've just set up. We're in a glider which has almost no instruments. How are we going to make it through a 6,000 foot thick cloud layer with no instruments? If I don't pay attention to the bank, what happens when you bank an airplane or a glider? You lose some, you get some nose down pitch. The airspeed is going to accelerate. In a glider like this, it accelerates real fast once you put the nose down without the speed brakes. You saw that when we buzzed the guard shack. We were coming down with the speed brakes on. When I turned them off, it was like we went up almost to red line speed almost instantly. In a real glider, to be stuck on top of an overcast layer like this would be deadly. You would not make it through the clouds. And those speed brakes are as much a safety feature for VFR in IMC situations in a glider, which can happen. This isn't quite the way it would happen, but it could. I'm not going to deal with VFR and IMC in a glider. But I want you to understand, in principle, though, the whole idea of the speed brakes in the glider for this situation is if you have a controlled descent. Now, the controlled descent in a glider is a really wild situation, right? But the controlled descent here in the glider with the speed brakes, yeah, it's a wild ride, but it's stable. And so we're going to use this to, in principle, though with a very different technique, learn about how an airplane, as long as we get them stable, we can get them through a cloud layer, get underneath, and then you proceed to a landing. So I've just been flying around. I've made a couple turns. I know roughly I'm over the Indy airport and so on. I don't know exactly where I'm at. But what we're going to do is the stable descent. Yeah, it's a wild ride in the glider. We're going to go down through the clouds. Once we get out, I'm going to recover to kind of normal flight, get my bearings, and then we're going to land with no wind, same point, slightly larger ground roll, and we'll finish this flight. So if you're ready, I'm ready. We're stuck on top of the clouds. We're in a glider. I wouldn't purposely in the real world do it quite this wild, but we can just for fun and to make a point. I'm going to do it far more wild than I would do in the real glider at this point. I'm going to pop the speed brakes. Normally I would let it go down kind of gently. Here we're going to have some fun. I'm going to go down close to vertical-ish, and then I'm going to just kind of play with the elevator and the aileron. I don't know quite where I'm at. I don't know quite what attitude we'll have as we pop out. You have my word. We're coming through about 11,000 feet. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but in the Microsoft, I could actually sort of just barely see the ground. I don't know if that comes out in the video. To me, I'm not trying to cheat. Now we're in the clouds. I can't see a thing. I do admit I have a rough idea of where we are. You have my word, I'm just sort of playing with this right now. I don't know which way we're pointed, don't know exactly where we're at. Purposely trying to make it a wild ride to show you that with this design glider, you get the speed brakes out, I'm not going to overspeed the airplane, and that's what makes it safe. And I'm just going to let it go. I'm sure it's doing some pitch fugoid-ish thing. I really don't know which way I'm pointed right now. I don't know if I'm vertical, upside down, right side up, whatever. We are going to pop out here any second. So, actually we're upside down. Okay, that's interesting. Looks to me, let's see, that's executive drive. So that should be the Sam Jones right there. That's actually the parking lot where the A7 crashed into the Ramada Inn back in 1987. That's unplanned. It just happens to pop out there, and I know where that is. So we're going to turn this way, and we're going to land on the entrance road to Indy Center. We'll get the flaps out, gear is down, and we're going to set up on a final approach. We're not going to buzz the guard shack this time. Didn't have the gliding energy from there to get over there, buzz the guard shack, and then work our way back. So this is a more sedate and stable approach than I did last time. But remember, there's no headwind this time. And if you watch what I'm doing, you can kind of look out here, maybe see the blue handle. I am playing with the speed brakes a little bit, and I'm just eyeballing it. I don't care. I really am not looking at the altimeter at all. I'm just eyeballing angles. I have a couple of quick glances at the airspeed, but basically I'm just kind of pitch plus power predicts predictable performance or provides predictable performance. I'm basically doing this more on feel. My aim point is just short of where I want to land. So basically I'm aiming for about perimeter road. Manage my speed. I'm really trying to come in as slow as I can here at the end. Level off and touchdown. No headwind, otherwise I touch down, same point, same speed. We made it to the second row of trees. So anyway, admittedly this was fun, but we learned some basic foundational lessons about how you can have confidence in off-airport landings being survivable. Try to land into the wind. You're going to find out, and we'll cover this later, the ability to vary the glide, and the fact that we could glide really, really poorly is actually a wonderful thing. We learned that weight does not necessarily hurt the glide. It has pros and cons, but being light has pros and cons. And we also learned in principle, though we definitely don't want to do it this wild, for a VFR and IMC where we're letting somebody down through the clouds, the idea is to find something that's appropriately stable for that airplane. In this glider, we can get away with a lot. Let's find something that's appropriately stable, descend through the clouds. Once you get out of the clouds, then you can go from there. If the clouds are lower, it's going to require a somewhat different technique, and that'll be covered much later in the course. But anyway, thank you for flying with me with these 4 flights. We've got one more lecture to go. I'll go through some of the background of what we learned about in this flight, and then we're on to the individual modules. Thank you.